Imagine this situation. One shot, two potential victims, and hundreds of suspects. In this video, we will tell you about the perfect crime. Almost perfect. May 9th, 1997 in the Italian capital was hot in the literal and figurative sense. It was a clear, sunny day. A young petite blonde studying law at the University of Rome La Sapienza went out into the courtyard of the educational institution with her friend Yolanda Ricci. Classes had just ended, and now the girls were planning to walk along the streets of Rome. The building of the law faculty was the following form. Attention to the screen. This is the most important clarification in a very complex case. You see that from the exit of the building to the pedestrian street, there is an asphalt area. The friends took a couple of dozen steps towards the roadway. Suddenly, Marta fell. Yolanda decided, her friend retreated. She bent over Marta, called out, trying to bring her to her senses. Yolanda was struck by the fact that her friend's eyes were wide open and motionless. The girl did not respond to words or touches. Yolanda called for help from students passing by, then called 118 to the emergency services. 3 doctors in white coats tried to help the student on the spot. They gave her artificial respiration, but the girl never regained consciousness. Marta was taken to the hospital's intensive care unit, where doctors fought for her life. The victim underwent a tomography of the brain. Marta received a bullet wound to the head. The bullet went through the back of the head. The entry hole was behind the left ear. In the young woman's head, the bullet broke into 11 pieces. The largest fragment hit the brainstem. The doctor's prognosis was disappointing. Only a miracle could help the girl. Meanwhile, the police of Rome were informed about the attempted murder. The shooter seemed to have challenged the entire legal community of the city. Given the location of the crime, dozens of special service vehicles began to arrive at the law school building within minutes. In addition to police officers, high-ranking city officials and the head of the Rome Police Department arrived at the scene. Investigators began questioning witnesses. Iolanta was among the first to be questioned. According to the girl, she did not immediately understand what had happened. Only a few dozen seconds later, a terrible thought occurred to her. Her friend had been shot. Marta was walking and suddenly fell. The fall was preceded by a dull sound. Iolanta claimed that she had not seen anyone with a gun in their hands. There were parked cars on the site, but the cars were empty. None of them moved while she waited for the ambulance to arrive. Based on Yolanda's testimony, investigators assumed that the shot could have been fired from the windows of the university building. The parked cars were in front of the girls, and the shot was fired by the victim in the back of the head. Thus, the shooting could have been from any window of the university building that overlooked the inner platform. The building had many floors, dozens of windows. Hundreds of students and teachers were in the building at the time of the shot. Just questioning each of them would take more than 1 month. It was necessary to start with those who benefited from the girl's death. While one part of the investigative team studied the crime scene, the other part began studying Marta's biography, as well as questioning witnesses. 22-year-old Marta Russo, a 4th-year law student, lived in a house with her parents in the suburbs of Rome. She specialized in constitutional law. She studied diligently. Her father was a professor, and his daughter tried to match his high status. Marta drove a used Fiat, played sports, was the champion of the Lazio region in fencing, did not use drugs, and was not noticed in conflicts with other students. The girl had a boyfriend. After the check, he was immediately excluded from the list of suspects. He was in another part of the city, which was confirmed by numerous witnesses. The miracle did not happen. Marta died without regaining consciousness 4 days after the assassination attempt. Since the case had taken on a resonant character, The Prime Minister of Italy, Romano Prodi, and the Mayor of Rome, Walter Veltroni, attended the girl's funeral. Hundreds of students attended the funeral. Despite her young age, Marta had a very mature wish. She signed a consent form for posthumous donation. She was inspired to take this step by the story of an American boy, Nicholas Green, who after his death became an organ donor for 7 people at once. Let's return to our case. The investigation considered several motives for the crime. The first motive is political. May 9th is considered a memorable date in Italy. On this day, in 1978, Giuseppe Impostata, an Italian journalist, radio host, and activist, was killed. He was known for exposing the activities of representatives of the Sicilian mafia in his articles. But most importantly, on the same day as Giuseppe, the former Prime Minister of Italy, Aldo Mora, was killed. Mora was kidnapped in Rome by members of the left-wing underground organization Red Brigade. The organization operated in Italy from the 70s to the end of the 80s. Its members set as their goal the creation of a revolutionary state as a result of armed struggle and Italy's withdrawal from NATO. On May 9, 1978, in Rome, in the trunk of a red Renault, parked in the city center, the body of Aldo Mora, riddled with machine gun fire, was found. It was suggested that the student and her friend Yolanda could have been members of right-wing political organizations. Marta's murder could have been a show trial for those who did not agree with left-wing ideas. This version was not confirmed. Marta and Yolanda were never members of political parties or movements. The girls were generally far from politics. They did not even participate in the student council. As a second version, the assumption was considered that the criminal confused the object of the crime. The killer's target could have been Yolanda, not Marta. From behind, the killer could have confused the girls. The friends were not similar in appearance. Marta was a blonde, Yolanda was a brunette. But just a few days before the tragedy, Yolanda dyed her hair light. Now, from behind, they really could have been confused. Both were petite girls. This version had good grounds, considering who Yolanda's father was. Renato Ricci held an important position in the Ministry of Justice. He headed the procurement department for prisons. Investigators believed that perhaps they were trying to persuade Yolanda's father to participate in corruption schemes. Renato turned out to be intractable. Perhaps in this way, the mafia decided to get even with him. The official could have been avenged by those whom he had crossed in his time. Before working at the Ministry of Justice, Ricci headed one of the Italian prisons. It was possible that Renato could have had a long-standing conflict with one of the prisoners. After being released from prison, he could have taken revenge on his offender. This version was also not confirmed. According to Renato Ricci, no one threatened him, and he was not involved in any corruption schemes. And finally, the third version. Marta did have a conflict with one of the students or teachers, so the investigation had only a few indisputable facts in its arsenal. Marta was killed with a .22 caliber pistol. The shooter presumably used a silencer. The murder took place in the courtyard of a U-shaped building. The shot was fired from the windows of the university building. The shooter, most likely a man, had to choose a point for shooting where no one could interfere with him. In other words, the criminal could have locked himself in one of the rooms of the auditorium or shot from the windows of the men's restroom. The windows of the men's restroom were on the first floor. Note that there was a bar on the windows. The men's restroom was examined. The restroom was locked from the inside. Forensic experts examined the restroom hoping to find a cartridge case, but their hopes were not justified. Either the criminal took the cartridge case or the shot was fired from another room. The investigative team continued to examine literally every centimeter of the building, including the basement. On May 11th, a room used by the cleaning company La Pultera was examined in the basement. It was in this room that the police made their first interesting discovery. Rifle cartridges were found here. The employees of the cleaning company were interrogated. During a search of the house of one of the employees, 3 rifles, an air rifle, toy pistols, and a blank revolver modified to accept .22 caliber cartridges were found. Homemade silencers were also found. The owner of the arsenal, Paolo Braccotelli, admitted that sometimes he and his colleagues shot a rifle in the basement. They were fooling around, setting up a random shooting range in the room. Bullet holes were recorded in the walls of the university building. Indeed, the employees set up a shooting range in a public place. The version that one of the cleaning company employees could have accidentally shot Marta seemed quite plausible. Boulay caught up with Russo right in front of the entrance door leading to the warehouse where the company employees kept their inventory. The employees could have been playing with guns and accidentally shot the girl. Braccotelli said that he did not know Marta. However, the investigators soon had to abandon this version as well. None of the cleaning company employees showed up for work on May 9th. After the fact of storing and using weapons was revealed, the cleaning company fired the employees. A few days later, a new suspect appeared in the case. The investigators received a call. A technician from the Forensic Science Department claimed that the university librarian, 36-year-old Salvatore Zingale, could be involved in the murder. The man said that Zingale was interested in firearms. The technician claimed that the librarian sometimes visited the laboratory at the department and showed an interest in precision lathes. He asked if he could have cartridges and a handmade silencer made. The information was verified. Investigators searched the librarian's home. 6 pistols were found, one of which was a .22 caliber, as well as a large quantity of ammunition. Suspicions about the librarian only increased when a collection of photographs of young girls was found in the house. One of the girls in the photographs looked very much like Marta. Zingale was detained. The man categorically denied his involvement in the murder. He stated that he owned the pistols officially, and that he had been issued a permit for all 6 pistols. The photographs of the photo models were given to him by a friend, the owner of a modeling agency. Later, on June 6th, the detainee was released. A forensic ballistic examination showed that the pistols had not been fired for a long time, and most importantly, at the time of the shot, Zingale was in the philosophy department, which was confirmed by university employees. However, the case under investigation still affected the fate of the librarian. It was established that the permit for owning a weapon, which he provided to the police, was fake. The man was given a 1-year suspended sentence for illegal possession of a weapon. Meanwhile, the inspection of the university premises continued. It was decided to check every windowsill in the building for traces of a gunshot. In total, samples were taken from 53 windows. In fact, there were many more windows in the university building, but there were 53 suitable sources of gunshots. On May 21st, gunpowder particles were found in room number 6. This was a large classroom, inside which there was another room. It was assigned to the professor of philosophy of law, Nicola Lipari, and his assistants. Everyone who had access to the room came under suspicion. About 40 people. As witnesses, students who had a philosophy of law class that day were questioned, as well as Professor Nicola Lipari, a former member of parliament from the Christian Democrats, and his daughter Maria Chiar Lipari, a graduate student. The professor and his daughter attracted the attention of the investigators. A landline telephone was installed in the office of the professor's assistant. It was decided to check the incoming and outgoing calls made on May 9th. There were 2 calls from the phone that day. The first at 11:44 a.m. The call was received on Professor Lipar's mobile number. The second call was made a minute later, also on the professor's number. Most likely, It was his daughter, Maria, calling him. During interrogation, Maria Lipari said that she was alone in the professor's assistant's office that day, and that she had indeed called her father. Maria was interrogated several times. During the first interrogations, the girl said that she did not remember the details of that day. Later, she claimed that she did not hear a shot that day, but when she entered office number 6, 2 people were already there. 45-year-old Gabriele Oletto, a secretary, and 29-year-old Francesco Leporotto, a qualified bailiff. Gabriella was the first to be called for interrogation. She denied that she was in office number 6 at the time of the shot. She did not hear the shot, was in the 4th office, faxing documents to Germany, making photocopies of documents. During interrogation, Leporotto also claimed that he was not in office number 6. The investigators were skeptical of Gabriella and Francesco's testimony. The university staff were clearly hiding something. Considering that the faculty members were in collusion, the prosecutor's office decided to detain their head, Professor Bruno Romano. A month later, on June 11th, he was charged under Article 378 of the Italian Criminal Code. The police suspected that the dean of the faculty forced his subordinates to hide the true picture of what happened on that fateful day. He may have threatened his subordinates with dismissal. The investigators believed that, while at large, he could also continue to put pressure on witnesses. The professor was placed under house arrest. During the interrogation, he categorically denied the fact of putting pressure on his subordinates. The investigators were right. The arrest of Bruno Romano had a positive effect on the further course of the investigation. The university staff were afraid that they could suffer the same fate as the professor, and began to lift the curtain of secrecy about what had happened. On June 14th, Secretary Gabriella Aletta herself came to the investigators and began to give testimony. Gabriella admitted that she had indeed entered Office 6 many times on May 9th. In particular, she had spoken in the office with the bailiff Francesco Leporotto, demanding court documents from him. In addition to Leporotto, there were 2 more men in the office. She did not notice them right away, since the men were standing behind the curtains. It is important to note here that Office 6 was a large lecture hall combined with the office of the professor's assistant. Gabriella noticed the men only after a dull sound was heard. At this, one of the men pulled back the curtain and ran out of the room. In his hands, he was holding an object that looked like a pistol with a long barrel. He quickly put the object in a leather briefcase on the table and ran out. The second man followed him. He looked very scared. Gabriella called out the names of both. The men were university employees, Giovanni Scottoni and his friend and colleague Salvatore Ferraro. It was Scottoni who held the gun. The police arrested the men that same day, June 14th. Giovanni Scottoni was born in 1968. The 29-year-old doctor of law graduated from the Faculty of Philosophy of Law. He defended his doctoral dissertation on the topic of the relationship between mind and body. He studied the texts of John Locke and Immanuel Kant. Giovanni denied his guilt during interrogation. He assured the investigators that he had been framed. Scottoni stated that on the morning of May 9th, he had visited Professor Lecaldan's villa. He arrived at the university at 11:50, that is, 8 minutes after the shot, and could not have known what was happening in the courtyard of the building. He immediately went to the secretary and requested an exam verification certificate, which was handed to him immediately. The clock showed 5 minutes to 12 noon. After that, he immediately left Office 6 and went home. Accordingly, he did not hear the shots. In fact, he only learned about the murder after 1 p.m. from the TV news when he was already at home. His father, a respected man in Rome, can confirm this. He did not know the victim. The investigators decided to find confirmation of the young scientist's words. They requested documentation. The certificate issuance log showed the time as 12:05 p.m. The ambulance drove into the building's courtyard at 11:59 a.m. with the sound of a siren. Thus, at the moment of receiving the certificate, Giovanni could not help but hear the siren and at least inquire what was happening outside the windows. Giovanni said that he immediately left the building, but a survey of students revealed that at 12:20 p.m., he was still at the university. By this time, there were already many police cars with sirens outside the university building. It is impossible to believe that Scottoni did not even inquire about the commotion that arose within the walls of his native university. He could not help but show elementary curiosity. Giovanni Scottoni's strange behavior attracted the suspicions of the investigators. In addition, when questioning students, it became known that in his lecture on April 20th, Giovanni touched on the topic of committing the perfect crime. Salvatore Ferrara's testimony added to the suspicions of the young scientist. Ferraro stated that he was not at work, but at home. His words can be confirmed by his parents and sister Teresa. His colleagues told him about the shooting incident by phone at 12:30 in the afternoon. The investigators immediately requested a printout of incoming calls to the landline phone installed in Ferraro's house. According to the operator's report, there were no incoming calls to the phone from 11:17 a.m. to 12:56 p.m. Salvatore's sister confirmed that her brother spent the whole day at home. But the investigators managed to find out that Teresa herself left the house at 12:30. She went to the gym. Scottoni and Ferrara were detained. Ferrara was accused of complicity in the murder. Scottoni was charged with murder. The investigation had to answer the main question: what was the motive for the crime? In addition, the bailiff Francesco Leporotto was charged with complicity in the crime. According to Gabriele Olet's testimony, it was Leporotto who took the leather briefcase containing the pistol from the office. Leporotto denied taking the briefcase from the office, but confirmed that Scottoni and Ferrara were in the 6th office together for some time. Maria Lipari, the daughter of Professor Lipari, later testified in favor of the fact that all 3 suspects were in the 6th office. Let us recall that initially she claimed that she was alone in the office. Another witness, Giuliana Alzai, was involved in this case. She told the investigation on July 9th, that is, 2 months after the incident, that she saw Scottoni and Ferrara within the walls of the university building at around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. They walked together towards the fire exit. Both looked very agitated. At the same time, the description of the clothes that Scott and Ferrara were wearing did not match the descriptions given by other students. Later in the trial, the prosecution will place great emphasis on Giuliana's testimony. Before we move on to the trial, we would like to draw your attention to the fact that 3D technologies were used to solve this case. In the northern Italian city of Ferraro, there is an ancient university. At that time, the university's architecture department had the only 3D laser gun in the country. With the help of the gun, the courtyard where the crime took place was scanned, as well as all the adjacent walls of the university building. Specialists from the modeling laboratory created a 3D model of the crime scene in a computer program. With the help of the program, they tried to recreate the trajectory of the bullet. Let's be honest, the task was very difficult. The examination showed that the shot was fired from the windows of office number 6. But some experts harshly criticized this conclusion, which is quite justified. The examination did not take into account the main factor, the position of Marta's head at the moment of the shot. No one could give a precise answer to this question, not even her friend Yolanda. The trial was long and complicated. The prosecution was inclined to believe that Scottoni wanted to commit the perfect crime. He did not know the victim, and the victim did not know him. The defendant chose a place from which to fire a shot in such a way that the shooter's location could not be determined later. According to the prosecution, texts were found in Scottoni's desk during a search, in which he discussed the perfect murder as a challenge to society and the law. But the prosecutor was unable to present these documents to the court. Scottoni himself stated that the accusation of his murder of a student in the center of Rome was the worst slander he had ever experienced in his life. And if he had actually accidentally killed Marta, he would have confessed immediately. He had never handled a gun. Salvatore Ferrara also expressed hope in court that the investigation would eventually find the real killer. Salvatore insisted that they had been slandered. The prosecution felt that the defendants were behaving very arrogantly. The defense emphasized in their statements that the prosecution was based on the testimony of those who initially claimed that they had not seen anyone in the sixth office that day. That is, at first the witnesses lied. Then they told the truth. So which version of the testimony is correct? Perhaps the prosecution witnesses were pressured by the investigation. The defendant's lawyers also assured the court that Secretary Leto and Bailiff Leporotto had pointed out their clients under pressure. In fact, Scottoni and Ferrara were not in the sixth office that day. The defense learned that the secretary had been interrogated for more than 10 hours without being allowed to use the services of a lawyer. The decisive moment in the trial came when the court was given a tape of the interrogation of Secretary Gabriel Olé. The tape shows that the investigators literally forced the woman to testify against the young scientists. She refused to do so for a long time. The investigators hinted that if Gabriella did not say who was in the office, they would charge her with murder. In other words, she was forced to invent a story about the presence of Scottoni and Ferrara in the office. After the demonstration of the tape, the prosecutor's work was harshly criticized. The public began to change its opinion. More and more of those who believed in the innocence of the defendants stopped. Here we note the following fact. According to Aleta's colleagues, on May 9th, she looked extremely surprised when she heard about the crime committed that day. But the most interesting thing awaited those present at the next court hearing. Aleta testified in court. The woman denied the fact that she was pressured. She denied a fact that was already obvious to everyone. As a result, many considered the court's decision dubious. Salvatore Ferraro was sentenced to 4 years in prison for complicity in the crime. Giovanni Scottoni was sentenced to 5 years in prison for manslaughter. The court nevertheless found that the defendant had no intent to kill. The version of the perfect murder, according to the court, was untenable. We will talk about the true motive for the crime, which formed the basis of the guilty verdict later. Scottoni and Ferraro were also sentenced to pay civil compensation in the amount of 1 million euros to the parents and sister Marta Russo. Scottoni served his sentence in prison for only 1 year, then underwent rehabilitation in social services. Since he was accused of manslaughter, he was not deprived of civil and political rights. After heated debates, Scottoni decided to resign from the university. After resigning, Scottoni worked as a translator and proofreader, wrote books under a pseudonym. Even during the trial, Giovanni Scattonia married Cinzia Giorgi, a writer and screenwriter, in 2001. His wife always supported Giovanni and insisted on his innocence. Scottoni himself always considered himself innocent. He claimed that Secretary Gabriella Oleta testified against him under pressure from the investigation. Scottoni suggested that the investigator nevertheless consider a terrorist act as the main version of the murder. May 9th is a memorable date for the organization of the Red Brigade. In his judgments, he referred to one fact that rightfully deserves attention. Above, we mentioned the employee of the cleaning company and the .22 caliber pistols found on him. Paolo Braccotelli, that was the name of the employee, was subsequently convicted of subversive activities. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison for participating in the planning and preparation of the murder of law professor Massimo D'Antonio. The professor of the same University of La Sapienza was killed 2 years after the murder of Marta Russo in 1999 at the door of his own home. Braccotelli was part of the Red Brigade organization. After all the above, I would like to cite a number of expert arguments that Giovanni Scottoni and Salvatore Ferraro became the scapegoats in this complicated case. A well-known journalist from the newspaper La Repubblica chose the following phrase as the title of his article on the Marta Russo case: "Marta did not die of a cold after all." The meaning was literally as follows: since Marta did not die of a cold, Giovanni Scottoni killed her. In other words, he doubted Scottoni's guilt. In support of his version, the journalist cited the following facts. In the first days of the investigation, everyone was vying with each other to talk about the terrorist trace of the crime, pointing to the memorable date of May 9th. The murder of law professor Massimo D'Antonio 2 years after Marta's death indirectly confirms the version of a terrorist attack. Marta could also have become a victim of student squabbles. The fact is that in the second half of April 1997, elections for the leadership of the student union were held at the university. The pro-centrist forces triumphed in the elections. This caused a negative reaction among supporters of left-wing ideas. On May 10th, the day after the murder, a march was planned on campus to commemorate another sad date. On May 12th, 1977, student Georgiana Massey was murdered on the campus. The Massey case was never solved. Representatives of left-wing organizations were accused of her death. According to the journalist, the murder of Marta Russo could have been a kind of reminder to the authorities that the radical left in the country is not asleep. After the arrest, rumors spread in the media that Scottoni wanted to take revenge on Marta for rejecting him. In fact, Marta and Giovanni did not know each other at all. Marta was studying constitutional law. Scottoni was charged with manslaughter based on a crazy imitation of a scene from a film. This version was taken as the basis for the guilty verdict. The fact is that on the eve of the tragedy, on May 8th, in Europe, this date is celebrated as the day of victory over fascism. Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List was shown on television. In the film, there is a scene in which a German soldier shoots at Jews held in a concentration camp. He shoots for his own pleasure, for fun. According to the prosecutor, Giovanni, impressed by the film, decided to shoot at passers-by from the window. It sounds like nonsense, but the prosecution latched onto this very idea. According to the newspaper correspondent, there is no logic in such actions, for one simple reason. If Giovanni had decided to shoot at people, he would have done it alone, and not in the presence of witnesses. It would have been more logical to shoot from the toilet window. Another factor indicating the innocence of the convicted man is the words of the bailiff Leporotto after he was released from the courtroom. He said that he had slandered Scottoni and Ferrara because of threats he had received. He had been promised that during his arrest he would be placed in a cell with those who, so to speak, loved boys. Fearing for himself, he lied that he had seen the accused in the 6th room. He repeated these words during the trial, but his initial testimony was taken into account. The opinion of representatives of Italian society was divided on Scottoni's guilt. Some considered him guilty, others a scapegoat. Even the media covered the story from different angles, never reaching a consensus.